Good afternoon, good morning, good late afternoon to some of you joining us from overseas. My name is John Carroll. Welcome to today's presentation of the inService podcast series. The inService podcast series is an event series, a podcast that we live stream here today on channels such as LinkedIn and others, YouTube, Facebook, etc. To feature leading innovators across the service sector to talk about some of their growth in the market and some of their perspectives on the market. And we've done a really um, uh, my team has done a great job at aggregating a really strong audience for our featured guests, and they certainly raised the bar today. I'm really pleased to be welcoming to today's podcast longtime friend, colleague, and contributor to the Service Council, Joe Lang. Joe, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining today.
Oh, it's great to be here, John. Thank you for the opportunity and the invite.
So we make the podcast accessible to you as something you can revert back to and use as a resource. And today's topic is deciding when to standardize, localize, and centralize. Right. So a really important topic for those organizations that are growing organically or inorganically. You know, there's a lot of coming together. There's a lot of complexity as you grow on a complex scale and on a global scale, and sometimes it's more complex when you start to think about, you know, the inorganic side of the growth equation, where there are companies coming together that do things differently, or operate in their own manner, and how do you decide when to standardize or centralize, or when you allow for the leverage locally for those practices, approaches, processes, systems, tools, and technologies to kind of take on a life of their own. So today's podcast will be downloadable and consumable. You can get it at our website. You can get it on any of the normal, podcast channels you subscribe to, whether it's YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Overcast, or there's a whole list of others. So depending on your passion, you can access it there. It will be also available on LinkedIn, and we're streaming live on LinkedIn right now, as well as Facebook, Twitter, and other channels. So thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. And we do like to create an interactive environment, so we hope our listening audience becomes a participating audience. So if you have a question, a comment for Joe, by all means, please plug in. So Joe, by way of introduction, is the VP of Service Technology and Innovation at Comfort Systems USA. Joe, can you introduce yourself, something personal and professional about yourself, and then we'll get into the company and your day-to-day role and operation.
Sure. So I've been in the industry for 40 years. I've been with Comfort Systems coming up on 15 years. And uh, my job has taken me through St. Louis, Indianapolis, currently in Philadelphia. Um, but, it's been a really neat industry to be in. Started out as a technician, and I guess here I am today. So it's been quite a journey, but it's really interesting seeing so much of the industry evolve and develop, and then some of it that is exactly the same as it was 40 years ago when I started. And so that's kind of there's a conundrum within that, and it's kind of interesting to watch. So in my role, one of the things I'm trying to do is make sure that that doesn't come back and bite us like Yellow Cab and some of the hotels and things of that nature. But and I've been married 40 years as well. So
Awesome.
my wife and I tease each other though from the fact that because I travel so much, it's only been like 8 years, and maybe that's been good.
That's outstanding. So that's the secret sauce there. Nice work. Awesome. Well, Joe, let's for our listening audience, Comfort Systems USA. I see your trucks on the road locally here in the Boston market, Greater Boston region. Understand very well what you do, obviously as a member, and Joe is a board member and has been one of our founding board members of the Service Council. Joe's been contributing for a long time now. But for our listening audience, could you introduce them to Comfort Systems USA, and what is your day-to-day role at the company?
Sure. So Comfort Systems USA, we are a National mechanical contractor, both in construction and service. We focus on the HVAC market, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. And we are a decentralized organization by design, and that has both its challenges and its strengths. And we're going to talk about some of those as we have our conversation today. Um, we have grown substantially, certainly since I started with the organization, from around 700 million to over 4.2 billion now, with 16,000 employees and 2,500 plus service technicians out in the field. And so it's an absolutely outstanding company, and there's a lot of benefits to the way that we're designed, but it certainly brings its challenges, John. So um, it was a different organization than where I came from, which was a very centralized top-down organization. So we'll get into some of those conversations, and there's pros and cons to both. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when you say Comfort Systems USA is decentralized, now I know the operating company philosophy that you all embrace, but can you just talk a
mhm.
little bit about that decentralized approach that you all take?
Yeah, so probably the best way to describe it is, or even explain it, is for the size company that we are, we still only have about 70 corporate employees. And so all of the things that the operating companies need out in the field are out in the field. So HR is out there, most of the finance is out there, um, safety directors are out there. So instead of having this centralized conglomerate that does everything and sends people out to quote unquote help, um, we really have it running out in the field. So we kind of go by the phrase that we are built globally, but we act locally.
Yeah, outstanding, outstanding. And we're going to get into the pros and cons of that, the disadvantages, the advantages, and
Mm-hmm.
and some of those things in just a little bit. Let's first start though. There's some shifting priorities right now, right? There's some shifting priorities as well as challenges. So we just recently
Yes.
conducted the service leaders agenda, and yeah, we continue to see talent and workforce and skill set and availability of all of the above uh, be the leading cause of internal pain and pressure amongst service leaders. Externally, supply chain is lingering, but
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing some challenges with respect to the commercial side of the business, growing on the commercial front, and turning the attention towards growth and really prioritizing growth and revenue over cost reduction efforts. And so there's kind of this shift towards not only performance management but better understanding the customer, and then aligning your commercial offerings in a standardized method to uh, commercialize against that customer relationship. Where are those
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to do so? What are some of the things that you're kind of that are raising up on your agenda, Joe? What are some of the things you're tracking very closely and kind of raising up the ladder in terms of importance right now?
Well, everybody knows, and you'll hear it every day, that there is a talent crush, right? Can't get enough
Yep.
talent, can't attract enough talent. Our HR and talent management director, who I've been with the last 2 days, has stated that there's 11 million jobs out there, but only 6 million unemployed people to fill those jobs.
Right.
And it's no different in our industry. So everybody is crushed by that.
Yep.
So the things that we're trying to look at and where we kind of try and focus is, of course, we want to attract people to our organization. Um, in the grand scheme of things, you're either growing or you're shrinking, and I'd
Yep.
rather be in a company that's growing.
Yeah.
Because if you're shrinking, the chance of you staying there it gets risked, right?
Yep.
But the challenge with any of it is, how do you create scale for the workforce that you've got, so that you don't just rely on acquiring new talent. So
Yeah.
um, we grow by acquisitions and organic growth. And when we do these acquisitions, one of the things we focus on is helping them scale their people better. And that's a combination of technicians, whether it's training, technology, um, uh, it can be any one of those. Sometimes it's just process, right?
Yeah.
Cutting out the process. So the thing that we probably get the most focused on is how do we attract the talent to our brand, and then how do we help scale it better than either our competition or either other industries.
Yeah, yeah, I think you make a good point on the talent side of things as well as in terms of the importance of attracting, onboarding quickly,
Yep,
mentoring, and creating that career path potential for that field service engineer coming into the role. And then once they're in the role, how can you make their life easier, right? And focus on an
absolutely.
effortless, frictionless experience, and we continue to see that. What would you say, Joe, are some of the greatest inhibitors to tackling some of these critical issues right now, and some of the areas of your business that are, challenging you?
So there's a couple of factors out there because of the labor market. Um, it is a employees market as far as when it comes to taking a job. It's
Yeah,
not like our offer is the only one they're going to get.
yeah,
Okay, so that's a big challenge. So you really should, as any hiring manager, absolutely take into consideration that whoever you're interviewing has at least one other offer and probably has two or three. So then that drives the pay aspect of it.
yeah,
And so as you look at those, the one thing you've got to make sure you're doing as a business is keep up with the cost aspect. That has a huge cost impact on what you're doing. Now you can fight the pay aspect, but
yep,
then you're not going to get people. Okay, so
yeah,
it's a math problem, and so make sure that you're focused on that. The other thing that really kind of resonates with us, and we're really driving pretty hard, is just the diversity of both um, people and cultures, as well as the workforce itself. We're like everybody else. We have this challenge with can we work remote, and we've proven that we can do a lot of the things that we do remotely. But the challenge with that is it can also affect your culture because you don't have the culture influence when you are at home by yourself in your office. Okay.
yeah, yeah,
And a lot of offices, prior to the pandemic, the culture was built around the people building relationships. And so you just have to work at that differently. And that's another thing that we've kind of focused on is how do we continue to maintain our culture, which is very decentralized, but also do it when our decentralized operations are also decentralized out of the office and at home.
yeah, yeah. I think you're absolutely right, and we're going to get into people, process, technology, data, parts, and the
Mhm.
decision to centralize versus localize. We're going to get into that stuff, the topic du jour. But the other area is performance measurement, and can you talk a little bit about how does Comfort Systems USA measure the efficacy of its business, and is that standardized across these operating companies and across all the different divisions, if you will?
Some of it. So I mentioned one of the things that we're kind of going through is that as we start to leverage data and drive our business with data, which gives us leading indicators versus most businesses still look at lagging indicators. A financial report is a lagging indicator for the most case.
Yep.
That's how much you spent, how much you kept, and so on and so forth. Um, the cost of building out that data structure is going to be high.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the way that we tend to measure is through financial results, right? We're a
Hmm.
publicly traded company. That's how Wall Street wants to know how's our cash flow, how's our profitability, earnings per share, those types of things. But then you get into the insides of what drives those, and you can start to find some other things. Other places where we're starting to do a better job of measurement is employee retention.
Mm.
Okay,
Yep.
because you're not helping yourself in the talent crush by letting good people get away from you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
that one's a huge one. A lot of people I don't know have focused as well on that, because I hear everybody saying, we need more people, but you look at the turnover rates, and I was at a conference this weekend. Call center or contact center turnover rate nationally is 45%.
My goodness.
My goodness. So, measuring some of those key things, employee retention, customer retention, we're starting to focus on that. And then we're also starting to focus on a lot of things using data to measure customer experience, not by what they tell us, by
Yeah.
what we see in our experience out in the customer with their equipment. So we're starting to measure those differently. And then most of the operating companies, because we're decentralized, they will have certain key things that they measure that are about their environment. And that really focuses a lot on employee experience. And one of the things some of our really successful companies have done is, you do a couple of employee experience surveys, right?
Yep.
And if you don't do anything with them after 2 or 3 cycles, they're totally useless.
Yeah.
And so the drive has been is don't measure employee experience, drive employee experience. And that has to happen on a very local level. So a lot of financials, because that's where everybody really is going to do at the end of the day. But then there's parts underneath that you're going to have to start to focus on. And that's where you kind of get into what needs to be centralized, localized, or standardized.
Absolutely. I love what you just said in terms of looking at you got to continue to look at those what would be considered lagging metrics, right? The
Mm-hmm.
financials and other things. But the ones that are causal in nature to those lagging indicators are oftentimes more critical because you can affect those, right? You can make changes to the contributing factors to those KPIs that are more effect oriented. So the financial metrics, you can look at contract attach rates, the
Yes.
renewability of contracts, right? So I love the point you bring up there. If I want to lose weight, Joe, or if I want to lose these love handles, I need to look at the number of Twinkies that I eat on a daily basis, right? So that's
Yes.
causal in nature. uh, let's get into the topic du jour and start framing out today's discussion. So
Okay.
you've been in both environments where there's a centralized approach and then there's a localized approach. Where do you land on the debate? Because we hear arguments for and against. I'm sure there's a hybrid and a middle ground, but what are your viewpoints on the debate?
So I think that depends on where you are in that organization.
Mm.
I can tell you when I was working out in the field,
Yep.
having this centralized corporate entity that was always coming in to help, um, that never felt very good because it didn't feel like they understood our local business, but they
Sure.
were acting as an enterprise entity. And then now I'm a corporate puke technically, but I do remember when I wasn't, and we drive very hard the fact that um, remember how you used to be treated,
Yep.
and treat people the way you wanted to be treated, even though we're a corporate entity. I mean, we're publicly traded. There are certain things we have to do, but in the process of doing that, you can treat people with a lot higher respect and regard than I've experienced. So I don't think it's as much around whether it's standardized, centralized, or localized as much as it is really it comes down to how you're going to treat people, whatever um, classification you fall into. And I just know that in a lot of cases, the centralized organization I worked for was um, not as pleasurable as having a collaborative conversation about what is going on with your business versus being told what they think your business is doing and what you need to do to fix it. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, great points, Joe. And we had a contributing question from one of our listening audience members to one of the comments that you had made previously around moving to remote. And the question was from Juan Cruz from Jimenetics. Thank you, Juan.
Mhm.
Juan is a board member. Thank you for joining. Culture changes performance. Was there any negative impact to performance when you went remote? So that was a comment you had made earlier.
Um, Initially, yes, and some of that, and I can only speak for our organization, although I've heard from a lot of organizations. Yes, there was some of it that um, had negative performance because people weren't used to working in an environment without almost constant accountability because there was a boss or a coworker there.
Yep.
That was reasonably short lived.
Yeah.
So, as we tried to do things like tracking how many times people signed on to their accounts and all that, once we got the message out that we just want you to do your job. If you can do it in 2 hours, get it done in 2 hours, get it done in 6 hours, um, and stopped trying to manage the remote workforce. We just let the remote workforce work, and it started to come back up. So it was fairly short lived, but there was an initial impact. And when I talked to people in other industries, some of them were like, "Yeah, it was brutal. At first, people loved it, and then it dropped off." There were some interesting things that we saw, like the number of call outs for people because of illness, children, whatever the case may be, those almost evaporated with the remote workforce.
Interesting.
So,
It's kind of a counterintuitive approach there in terms of letting people be adults, right?
yeah.
Because like nowadays, it's like performance measure ourselves to death, and it's interesting because we do our annual Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey, which
Mhm.
we're recasting here in the April timeframe, where we go to the front line and we ask the technicians and engineers, what do you like and dislike, and the number four dislike behind paperwork and administrative tasks, behind the pressure from customers and management, and
Right.
behind the time spent finding information was being tracked and traced.
Yes.
So you're taking you in that cultural development or sort of evolution when you went remote. I think that was probably received very positively, that it wasn't Big Brother like, and we're all adults in the room trying to perform our job, and we've got these KPIs that are outcome oriented. Can't you just let me do my job and be an adult, right? So
And from a field service technician standpoint, they work alone.
yeah,
They've been virtual. I mean, that workforce has been virtual its entire life.
yeah,
So the pandemic didn't impact them the same way it impacted people that worked in the office.
yeah.
And so, we had some of our service technicians going like, what's the big deal? I haven't seen my supervisor in a month. And so
Yeah, a lot of engineers start their day from their home, right? So in
now
many industries.
to another point with Juan, and you probably heard this, just to kind of tie this up a little bit, but the next negative impact was when people started saying we're going to go back into the office.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so you saw productivity go down because that was their way of fighting that aspect. And some of it actually they were inadvertently proving the point that, yeah, we need to go back in the office because productivity is dropping.
Yep.
But it also led to obviously the great resignation, as some people put
Yeah,
it. But
yeah.
I think what people have found is that you can effectively do some of it. There's probably not a way to do all of it, but you can certainly can control it, and you can leverage it into your employee experience to help
Yeah.
retain workers, frankly.
We had another interesting comment from Joe Bergman. Hello, Joe. Nice to see you. Joe, are there things you do in the corporate puke training process to help them better relate to the field needs? Can you address that one?
Yes. So, and I'm going to go back to when it becomes about people and not the job.
Sure.
We are starting to hire very differently. So, like, I'm getting ready to add another person to my team, And the interview we have for them on Friday is actually an audition. We're giving them enough information to actually do part of the job. We're going to play the role of the person calling in, getting help, and see how they do relating to the person. So we have a huge focus on soft skills within our organization now because, again, we are decentralized, and so we don't mandate from the top. We get people to do things by influence and collaborating. And so, yes, you have to first of all find the right people to hire and train them what they need to know. And when you hire the right person, they can be collaborative. So a lot of this goes back to the hiring process. There are people that are already in the organization. You can't go undo that, and they've got good skills. So that's where you have to bring the training in and kind of help them from a soft skills standpoint
Sure.
versus a technical knowledge standpoint. So we've kind of diverted our training around focusing like 70% on soft skills, whether it's a service manager, a coordinator, a service vice president, or leader of a department like me. It's really about the soft skills. And then we build our technology and training around teaching them what they need to know.
Outstanding. Yeah, we're seeing the same trend, right? A lot of organizations are placing a greater emphasis on the soft skills side of things. The hard
Mhm.
skills can either be trained or enabled in many regards, especially with upskilling and reskilling that's happening with all these augmented reality technologies and BI
Yep.
tools, and I think you make a really great point there. Let's dig in then on standardization, centralization, and localization. Can we
Okay.
go one by one? Can we talk about maybe some examples of areas where you've standardized and then
Sure.
go down to centralize and localize?
Sure. So there are, when you talk about standardized processes,
Hmm.
those come along to things where you want to leverage data. Okay. And the challenge with that is if you don't have at least some standardized processes of either how you do a contract or how you answer a call, um, what you tend to get is a data lake full of stuff that you can't sort through. Now, the other thing is, one thing standardization helps is it helps with the customer experience,
Yep.
and it also helps with the employee experience. You know, uh, if you look at employee exit surveys, one of the things that frustrates them immensely is that they didn't know how people would react to certain things or in certain situations. And that's a lack of standardization. So that puts a cloud of doubt in their mind and it makes people uncomfortable. So one thing standardization does help with a lot is just the expectation of the employee or even the customer of kind of knowing how the company or the person's going to react or how they are going to respond in certain situations. Standardization helps you along those items.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Yeah, I'm gonna, in summary, after I hear your things, I don't want to steal any of your thunder. I'll let you talk about the three areas, and then I'll offer some areas that we're hearing about. But could we move down to centralization?
Sure.
Any areas of the business that you could talk about as an example?
So, and I'm going to speak a little bit along our comfort system side just because we don't centralize very much, but
Yeah.
there are things that we have to centralize. Okay. So we have to centralize finance. Okay. Again, publicly traded company, there are things you do and things you don't, and it's got to be monitored and local, and it's got to be centralized, and it's got to be driven out into the field. These are the ways, the only way you can do this. Okay.
Yep.
And the difference between standardization and that centralization is that the standardization doesn't need a department or somebody to monitor it. You can set the policies or set the processes. Everybody can go execute it. The centralization is we have to have people that go out and help those companies execute it. So, it takes um, corporate controllers and things of that nature to go out and drive that. Another area that gets centralized and probably has to is just, let's call it IT, but um, the amount of risk that exist in the world just by having the most powerful computer in the world that could have sent the space shuttle up the first time, or the Apollo to the moon, is sitting right here. It's also the biggest um, opportunity for somebody to get in and steal your business from you. And so
Yeah.
IT is another one where the centralization is, it has to be standardized and processed, but we have to go help people do it. And that's got to be from the top down, because I'm sure there's a bunch of people out there on this call or who will listen to it who have been through an experience of a ransomware. And we got hit in 2017, and that was not any, there was no joy to that at all, even though the impact was almost negligible. Um, Still, it's a scary feeling to be that out of control with a company this size.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we're going to talk about the change management process in just a little bit, but you
mhm.
mentioned something critical in there that I just want to call out, and that is the involvement. The collaboration on the change process, where we hear a lot of involvement of the frontline, involvement of cross-functional teams, and the importance of communication across those barriers, in terms of that change management process. We'll get your viewpoints on that in just a second. What about localization, Joe? What are some of the areas that you're saying, okay, we're not going to fight this fight? There's some local nuances. We'll let you do things your way. What are some of the things you're thinking about there?
Yeah, so that localization really is allowing the local leadership, and for us, that's an operating company, to understand their market and adopt their processes that create the best, again, employee and customer experience. So that can be almost anything that doesn't have um, let's say, either a financial or a risk from a legal standpoint. So, how you dispatch people,
Yeah,
how you take calls to customers. I mean, we've got some opcos that different greatly on how they answer the phone, where they answer the phone, how they dispatch technicians, um, how they handle performance reviews, anything of that nature. So that localization is what kind of helps build the operating company's culture locally.
yep,
And the things that get centralized or standardized help them kind of adopt their local culture to our overall culture. But there's so much of what can be done out in the field, I feel like should be localized, so that you're building a business that treats people well and treats customers well, because
yeah,
the employees are happy doing it.
yeah,
Having a fixed, I mean, one of the companies I worked for, there was a fixed way of how you dispatch people, how you answered the phone. I mean, it felt like I, I was there to run a process and not to go do what I like to do, which is take care of people and take care of customers.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There's something to be said about brand experience control, but
Hmm.
there's also something to be said about the empowerment to the person, right? So that it's not just, this process rigor that makes it boring, and you can't do the unexpected, or the things that might be unique and different to your, region, or your personal brand, if you will, as an individual. So I love the points you make there, Joe. That's actually some really cool stuff. We hear a lot of challenges in terms of standardizing on areas such as commercial services offerings.
Right.
So the number of variations of different commercial services that are out in market. We hear nomenclature used such as tier one, tier two, tier three agreements. We hear,
Right.
bronze, silver, gold, platinum. We hear,
Yes.
pro, advanced, beginner. There's all sorts of different variations, and I think there's something to be said about standardization of commercial services offerings. I think there's some goodness that can be had there, so that those customizations are kind of managed and mitigated, and you don't have those nuances in the customer relationship that um, might present challenges in the future. The dispatching side of things is a little trickier, right? Centralizing. We
Yes.
we do hear some large organizations centralizing still, and for all the good reasons, right? It eliminates the fragmented data, it eliminates those silos, it gives you real-time visibility and optimization. There's synchronization of parts and people and all
Hmm.
sorts of good things there. But there's some trickiness to that, culturally speaking, that you might lose some of your employees with that centralized approach. Um, the localization, we hear more so, just some of the cultural nuances that come into play, right? Especially when you start to think global footprint.
Hmm.
There are some areas of the world where service is just expected and you can't monetize it.
Right.
There's localization obviously is language. Local language. Of course, we would
Hmm.
certainly want to allow for those localization efforts. But in terms of process and approach and commercial offerings, sometimes you have to look at something unique in market because it's just not resonant.
Right.
So those are just some of the things that we're hearing as we're talking to members. Any of those kind of relate and kind of resonate with you, Joe?
Yeah, there's a couple of them like and I don't perceive centralization as bad at
Yeah.
all. Okay, so like to the point of dispatchers, yes, I've watched companies that um, centralized those things and then went to things like hub and spoke and all kinds of fancy names around it. But it comes down to centralizing. One of the challenges with it is when you take those centralized things that you talked about, like the data and the statistics that come out of that,
Yeah.
and then you turn around and drive that down to the local operating company, it feels like a hammer.
Yeah.
And so
Yep.
those are some of the things you have to be careful with.
Yep.
Um, we are really try to be extremely careful of not giving people um, information and data at our level that we can use for bad behaviors because it can happen. Okay, so I don't want anybody to think that centralization is just the evil empire or anything. It isn't.
Yep.
It's a process, right? It's a
Yep.
process. Whether it doesn't make any difference, but sometimes the unintended results that come out as a result of it create what most people would perceive as the horror of going into a standardized or a centralized type of process. So interestingly enough, this conference I went to on contact centers
Yeah.
who have such a high turnover,
Yep.
the centralization of that is driven mostly just because of the talent crunch.
Yeah.
They can't have 50 dispatchers spread all over the country. They
Yep.
need to have 30 of them that can handle the most volume. But the process of doing that means that their workload is just incredible. So there are good and bad sides to it. So when you think something centralized is going to be like the saving grace of everything you do, also understand that there could be impacts with people that you didn't see coming. So
Yeah. Yep.
sometimes that will lead to a negative response on a centralization. But there are things where you can centralize them, should centralize them, and if you do it the right way, it can be a tremendous value to an organization.
Let's talk about the right way then on change management when you're moving towards centralization or standardization. Who's involved? What system requirements are there from a technology perspective? Can you talk a little bit about the involvement, the importance of managing that change, and then what's incorporated in that change from a technology perspective?
Um, my experience has been that change management, when it is managed, you're probably off on the wrong foot to start with. Okay, because again, that tends to be I don't want to say heavy-handed, but it tends to be driven with a end in mind. And the change management, where I've seen it done exceptionally well, involves almost every level of an organization. Okay, to talk about, because change management is talking about really what the change is, how it impacts me. It's always got to be around the with them and what I might need to successfully execute this change. When change management is this is what we're going to do and why, then there really is no change management. Even though people talk about, yeah, we've got a good change management program in place and everything. No, you got a good document you're following. Change management most effectively is really from the ground up when people say we either want this and need it, or we can see why you want this. Here's how we can help you apply that and make it successful. So change management has to be a multi-layered
Yeah.
experience for everybody.
Absolutely, and it's not a project, right? It's not a start and a finish. It's more of an organizational evolution, and the step to evolution is involvement not only from leadership and cross-functional, but also frontline and those that are going to be impacted by some of these changes. And one of the two data points that I'll reference from that Voice of the Field Service Engineer survey that we conduct is that 60% of technicians that responded didn't feel that management enacted change based on their feedback, so they didn't
Mhm.
listen. And then 40% didn't feel like they had a role in innovation at the company. So there's some growth that we could have with respect to involvement of the front line in some of these change management processes that are for the betterment of the business, because they're closest to the customer. And by the way, uh, we're going to lose them if we don't involve them, because we're impacting their day to day, right?
Yeah.
Um, okay, let's great discussion, Joe. Let's go to back to Comfort Systems USA. So, unrelated to the topic or related to the topic, what's next for you all? I mean, there's a lot of crazy changes technologically speaking. We've got the people crisis that still is upon us.
Yep.
But what are you thinking about big picture for the next year, or maybe even over the next several years that are, on the agenda?
Or the years I've got left.
Yeah, there you go. How's that?
So yeah, there's a number of things. I think the biggest one is for us is we're starting to really leverage this digital transformation in the form of data. Okay, and it's not to really. Some people think that that starts to get where we're going to track people. Okay, there's a lot of risk to our business. So this digital transformation, on one hand, goes with our technicians. We've got 6,000 vehicles out on the road.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know, have you heard the term nuclear verdicts?
No, I haven't actually.
All right, so anybody that's got vehicles out on the road, they are exposed to nuclear verdicts. You're a big company, your truck rear-ended somebody, nobody was hurt, and they still are going to get $10 million out of the company for the incident that took place.
Oh, wow.
We had one recently where we were completely exonerated from any wrongdoing on a vehicle because we had cameras, technology, and everything. It still cost us a substantial amount of money. So even when you're
Yeah. To
innocent,
def-
you're
to de-
still
to
liable
to defend. Yeah, exactly.
to defend. But we actually still had to pay out a fee, not just for our lawyers and stuff. There
Mm,
was a settlement that had to go out to basically make it quit coming back in appeals and everything else.
mm,
So
mm.
when you get into that, you're going to have to use some technology. People are going to feel like naturally Big Brother is watching. But
Yeah.
again, when we sit down and talk with the people and help them understand the risk they are at personally in our vehicle, now you can get them to help us. And they have. They've come back and said, well, okay, here's where you should put a camera and not put a camera. Here are the
Yeah.
things I do want to hear about and the things I don't want to hear about. They don't want to hear every time they went 5 miles an hour over the speed limit.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
They just don't want. But they do want to hear when people had near misses and where the technology helped prevent them from having an incident, either
Yep.
automatic braking, cameras, whatever the case may be. So you have those types of things. And so we're focusing on a lot of that. And a lot of that's risk management, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
then we're also looking at using more leading indicators with data so that we can go help customers better.
Yep.
Again, to your point, all those agreements, tier one, two, and three, and gold, platinum, silver, they have this aspect about them is they're still date based, task based. Okay.
Yep.
We're going to come out in April and do these things. And if we do these things, you should have less failures. Um, However, we're doing a whole lot of things that are pretty wasteful, like filter changes. More than 65% of the filters that get changed in the industry are perfectly fine. So, how do we take and use data and sensors and IoT of things to go, let's change filters when we need to change them. Let's do PMs when we need to do them. Because the other thing, the environmental impact of that
Yep.
footprint for us has an impact. Less filters in the trash, better efficiency, so less greenhouse gases. We're driving our trucks less to try and reduce mileage and risk, but also greenhouse gases. So you have those kind of things that there's an environmental impact of that. So we're really starting to try and look at things that not just because they have a change of cost, but they give the customer a better experience, our employees, but we're trying to be really raise the awareness of just being responsible to the earth because
Yeah.
if you haven't watched the weather, there's some weird things going on, and I'm not blaming anybody, but we're doing the part that we can because it's important really, and it's
Absolutely.
important to the younger workers that are coming up. And you know what? As leaders, that we're responsible for that. So
Yeah.
by doing some of these things, we're going to drive a better employee experience. So there's a combination of just um, how you act and conduct yourself as an organization and the data that you use. And so those are kind of the things that we're looking at long term to help create just a better environment for our employees. And if we do it for our employees, they'll do it for our customers.
Outstanding, outstanding, Joe. Great discussion. You've been a board member, Joe, for quite some period of time now. What are
Mhm.
what are some of the areas of value you get from the role and being affiliated with us?
Wow, we don't have enough time for all that, John, but I'll put a few things here for people to think about. First of all, um, the research that you do is incredible. It helps to hear not just from what we see in HVAC, but you do it across all kinds of service industries, and there's best practices that people find out. It also really, some of the things that we focus on have come about because of the research you do with the technicians and the people in the front. That thing about innovation, I can't tell you how correct and how accurate that is. So
Yeah.
I can tell you some of the things that we've done from the technicians up, and we said, if you want to be a part of this, be a part. The line gets long really fast for technicians that really want to step up, and so that can happen at any level of the organization. And it's thanks to the things that you do and the research that you do that we've uncovered some of those things. The symposium is a great event for people to get around other service people and find those best practices and talk about people, process, um, and technology as well. And so I think that one's really good. I'm looking forward to that in September. Everybody should be there. I hope to see John and Juan there, and Joe and Juan there because it's a great event. But so from the research and the symposium, and those are just a couple of things. The other thing, being a board member, the exposure that I've gotten to other people that I've had calls with other people to, help them with things they're challenged with, but I've
Yeah.
also had conversations to get their feedback.
Yeah.
That community of the board that you've built is terrific. So
Yep.
there are the places that you've taken the service council since I started have been phenomenal. So I can't thank you enough for where your leadership has taken the service council from when I first got involved with it many years ago. We'll just
Yeah.
leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. It doesn't characterize how old we are, Joe. So that's
No,
good.
people can see it.
They sure can. Silver
Yeah,
tsunami.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, Joe, you've been a true ambassador of servant leadership in terms of offering yourself as a resource. And my goodness, what you've acquired over 40 years in the industry, from frontline to leadership, and all the innovation you've done at all the major brands you've been with. It's a great resource for our community. So thank you for being just a true ambassador of that servant leadership approach. We did have one more question come in for our participating audience, and before we depart here, we might as well get to it. So, Thomas Maiello, another board member. Thank you, Tom, for joining. Great discussion, he says. Let me put this over here so we can all see it. He wants to, you mentioned the filter replacement as an example of a PM task that could be deferred based on actual filter condition. Is Comfort Systems implementing remote monitoring of systems to improve maintenance tasks and scheduling? So you talked about IoT. Are you looking at those remote triggering sensors and technologies?
Yes. So, great question, Tom. And this could be a whole nother topic, a whole nother podcast. But yes, we are. And again, there are a number of technologies and platforms out there that you can accomplish this with. And where I'm trying to go, and we're researching I'm pilot testing like 3 of them right now. Okay. And the technicians are the one giving me the feedback. Once again, get the people who are doing it, not me going, this looks like a really cool dashboard. The challenge with it that I'm finding in most cases is the customers don't necessarily want to buy it.
Yeah.
They believe it's a cost reduction for us. So there is an enterprise or revenue challenge with that. However, what I'm also learning is that there is possibly a way to make it beneficial for both of us. One of the things is, if you're not going to change the filters all the time, instead of having the PM task-based, date-based, we're going to do this and this and this. Okay, we're going to monitor and do these things, and when we see something, maybe we include 2 filter changes because the data says we only need to change them twice a year, or we don't include it all and say, when you need a filter change, when the data says it does, here's how much it costs. So I think it's going to have impacts to the overall service model.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that that's a big focus for me because I pulled out a couple weeks ago a maintenance contract I sold back in 1986, and it looks exactly the same as the one we sell today. And so that's why I'm going down some of these things. So, Thomas, that's a great question, and it's really high up for us at this point, because I think we've got to get to a place where we're going to change the model, or somebody's going to come in and change it for us. So we move the cheese, or somebody move it for us, and then we'll have to play catch up. So yeah, we're looking at a lot of different things with that. And Thomas, if you ever want to have a discussion about that, ring me up, man. We can talk a while on it.
Yeah, I think there's many tentacles in terms of the benefits of moving to a remote monitoring approach, right? There's the predictive and proactive approach you can take within the customer relationship. There's also the learning that comes from machine learning and all the data and input that can help you with service processes, but also future product releases and all the good things that come about in terms of design for serviceability and eliminating some of these challenges in markets. So really great discussion. Joe, thanks for your viewpoints on that question, and Thomas, thank you for your contribution. So we'll land here. Joe, tell us something personal about yourself. You talked about being married for 40 years. You also kind of hinted at maybe approaching retirement at some stage in the future. What tell our listening audience something personal about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm getting at that age where about 3 or 3.5 years, I'm probably going to, at least as a formal job, move on from this. I'm bringing up people below me, and there's a couple of reasons that I want to do that. Number one is there's other things that I want to do with the rest of my life. So, like, I want to play more guitar, and I want to play more golf and more tennis. So those are 3 things that kind of drive that I'm kind of driving to. So, and for any one of those, maybe not the guitar, but certainly the golf and the tennis, you got to do it while you're still in the go-go years, because when you get into the no-go years, those things go out the window too. So
it's not easy getting old.
It's not easy getting old.
He is Joe Lang from Comfort Systems USA. Joe, this has been a great discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. I want to leave everybody with one other thought here.
Please do.
safety. Okay, keep your people safe, keep yourself safe, and whether it's at home, out on the road, or at work, nobody gets to do any of the things I want to do in retirement if you let yourself get injured. So please put safety at the top of your list of everything that you do.
Love it. Love thyself. I love it. Again, Joe Lang from Comfort Systems USA talking about localizing, standardizing, centralizing, when to and how to. So, what a great resource for our listening audience. If you're interested in referencing back today's podcast, you can do so. It will be available for download on our website. It can be accessed at any of the major podcast subscriptions that you have, whether it's Outcast or YouTube or whatever else there are. There's so many of them out there now. You can get it there. You can also get it on LinkedIn. We broadcast today's discussion live. So thank you to our listening and participating audience. It's been a great discussion. And Mr. Lang, thank you for all that you do for our organization. You're a great ambassador for service. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to be part of it.